You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to the I Still Love This Game podcast. Now, it goes without saying that this is a basketball podcast, right? But last year, you guys might remember, there was, during the lead up to the Super Bowl between the Rams and the Patriots, there was a lot of talk about Brady versus Jordan, because Brady was going for his sixth Super Bowl, and of course we all know Jordan, that's his biggest accolade, really. It's his biggest claim to fame, going 6 for 6 in the NBA Finals. And obviously with the Patriots getting dismissed quite early from the playoffs this year, we didn't really have to talk about that. But what we did see, and I alluded this to the last episode when I did do a very brief Super Bowl preview towards the end of the episode with TJ, I did mention that Patrick Mahomes reminds me a little bit of Jordan. Now, obviously not in accolades, and we'll get into that in a bit, but I got more emails and more comments and more messages in regards to that one comment than any other part of the show, which was surprising to me. However, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs have gone on and they won the Super Bowl. They beat the 49ers. And the topic hasn't gone away. So with that in mind, I've never shied away from those comparisons with Brady, and have allowed them on the show too. So I'm going to address that. And in today's show, I'm going to be talking about, are these comparisons fair? And where Mahomes might be ahead of Jordan, and what he needs to do to really catch up to Jordan, if it's even possible. Because to be honest with you, it's a very uncomfortable comparison. It always is when you're talking football players or baseball players to basketball players, because football players are at the mercy, especially if you're talking offensive players, I guess with defensive players too, they're at the mercy of the other side of the ball, because they don't play typically. I mean, some defensive backs will play wide receiver or whatever, but you don't see Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady lining up as, safeties or linebackers. So they are truly at the mercy of their defense to also carry their own weight. Whereas basketball players, they play both ends of the court. Now, with that being said, they're less susceptible to defensive errors. I mean, LeBron James, he would love being an offensive player on the as an NFL player, wouldn't he? Because he wouldn't have to worry about playing defense. James Harden qualifies as that statement as well. But when it comes to players that play both ends of the court, such as a Jordan, such as a Kobe, such as a Kawhi Leonard, such as Hakeem Olajuwon, Scottie Pippen as well, you've got a tremendous advantage as a basketball player because you're in control of your own destiny. And in some ways, basketball is the most individual-friendly team sport in the world, probably, when you think about it, because it's only 5-on-5, and you if you're a starter, you play a bunch of the game. You used to play like 40 minutes a game. We have a 48-minute game, so you're not on the bench too often. So you're not at the mercy of your teammates, not carrying their own weight. And a lot of the times, if you're a star player, you're going up against teams that typically have more overall talent. If you removed the top player from the opposing team as opposed to you, if you just line them up, typically, I'm saying typically here, typically those other teams have a little bit more, at least their role players have a little bit more confidence, typically. Let me emphasize that, typically. So let's go into that, and I will take that into account, that there are some obvious differences, because we've also become very, let's be honest here, we've also become very comfortable with the statement that it's hard to compare even eras with the NBA. It's hard to compare players like Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain to Anthony Davis or LeBron James or Russell Westbrook, or can we really compare Bob Cousy to Russell Westbrook, for example, because the eras are so different. So imagine how much more difficult it is to not just compare NBA players of today as opposed to the 90s or the 80s, but NFL players of today to NBA players of the 80s and 90s. So it's interesting, but I'm not going to shy away from it. I'm going to try to address it because I think there is some merit there in terms of that comparison. And it's important to know Mahomes' age, okay? And he's only 24 years old. Now, obviously, you might think, well, that's, in basketball terms, 24, you pretty much know what you've got. For example, Kobe had 3 rings at that stage. And usually that's another nuance in making this so difficult, but not so much with the Jordan comparison, because Jordan played 3 years in college, whereas Mahomes played 3 years at university too, and there is a minimum for football players to, you can't just come straight from high school and play in the NFL. You have to be 3 years removed. Remember the Maurice Claret rule, right? So, he challenged it. It wasn't his rule, but he did challenge it. So that adds another layer or another fabric that maybe a lot of NFL or NBA fans aren't aware of. They might think 24, well, we kind of know. This is only his second season starting. 3rd year in the league. First year he sat behind Alex Smith. The Kansas City Chiefs traded up to get him. They saw they saw the potential. Nobody knew exactly how good he was going to be, right? But they saw the potential in him, and they went up and got him. So in his first year, but it's also important to note that he wasn't in a rebuilding project. That Kansas City Chiefs team was pretty good. Obviously, not like he made them a lot better. Let's be completely honest with that too. Alex Smith is not a bad quarterback. Of course, he will always be tied to the fact that he was no Aaron Rodgers, and of course he was taken way ahead of Aaron Rodgers. He was the first pick in the draft. Aaron Rodgers was, I believe, the 24th or the 26th pick in the draft, and Green Bay took him. But the conversation was always between him and Rodgers. And obviously, Rodgers has had by far the better career, but Alex Smith is still in the league for a reason, even though he just broke his leg and we may never see him start again. When I say just, that happened over a year ago. Excuse me. But the point that I'm making is when Mahomes came into the league, it wasn't like he was in a rebuilding process or a project. He was on a very good team. However, he lit up the league last season. That Kansas City Chiefs offense set all kinds of records. Of course, they had Kareem Hunt on that team, who was a very good running back. He's no longer on that team. All those weapons on the outside. They have Travis Kelce roaming across the middle. Excellent tight end. Maybe the best tight end in all of football. And that is saying something, because you got Greg Kittle. You've got so many great receiving tight ends. And they're good at blocking as well. And it's become, in some ways, maybe even more of a valuable position than a lot of wide receivers out there. And that's saying a hell of a lot when you consider how pass happy the NFL has become. But of course, Patrick Mahomes, his first season starting, was the league MVP, and it wasn't even close. He put up 50 touchdowns, which is the second most in league history, tied with Tom Brady, of course, trailing only Peyton Manning. So that was his first year, and they were the number 1 seed in the AFC. So the best record in the AFC. I can't remember if they had the best record overall last year or not, but it didn't matter because, of course, the Super Bowl is played on a neutral ground. And they fell behind. I can't remember in their first game if they fell behind, but they were definitely behind in their AFC Championship game up against the Patriots. And they came roaring back in that game. And that's going to be a trend in what we're talking about when we're talking about Mahomes' legacy so far. Very brief, but still it is his legacy. If he retired right now, he's got a legacy that's worth talking about. And they came roaring back. They actually had the lead late in the fourth quarter, and then the Patriots are marching the ball down. 4th down, so I'm going to try to explain a little bit of this stuff, but you guys should know it too. So 4th down is the final play of a down series. If you don't convert get the yardage that you need on that down, it's a turnover. And at that stage of the game, if New England didn't convert that play, they would have there would have been a turnover. In fact, it was an interception, that Tom Brady threw, but it came back because there was an offside play by a defensive player, and that's where you get a little bit hamstrung if you're an offensive player, because that is completely out of Patrick Mahomes' power at that stage, because he's put them in the lead, and then a really bad decision by the defensive player to be offside at that stage nullified it, because otherwise they would have gone to the Super Bowl last year, and we saw what the Patriots did to the Rams in the Super Bowl. You can only imagine. Similar things would have happened, although we did have that shootout between the Chiefs and the Rams on that Monday night game earlier on in that season. But I tend to think that the Chiefs were a better team, and I think they would have won convincingly, because we saw what the Patriots did to the Rams. So I tend to think that we would have seen something similar to that. So it was really one play that cost Patrick Mahomes a trip to the Super Bowl last year. Then you fast forward to this year. The guy dislocates his kneecap or fractures his kneecap, something ridiculous. I thought he was out all season because of this. I'll never forget this. I believe I was in Detroit and we went to a baseball game. I think that's what it was. Or it could have... No, actually, I think of all things, it was a haunted house tour that I went to. And we went to a bar afterwards, and it was a Thursday night, and someone said Patrick Mahomes is out for the season. He's blew out his knee. And I thought ACL or something to do with a ligament. It turns out he fractured his knee. He was only out for a couple of weeks, which is crazy, because at that point, you think the season is over. He comes back, tough bastard that he is. He comes back, and then of course they go into Foxborough, which is where New England plays, and they destroyed New England in New England. Of course, New England, pretty much up until the game against Baltimore, looked untouchable. Not just unbeatable, they looked untouchable. They were killing teams left, right, and center. And Baltimore beat them convincingly. But you kind of got the feeling that maybe New England was due for a loss, because they were undefeated at that stage. But when you saw Kansas City go in there and beat them, you know that it wasn't a letdown game in that situation, like maybe it was with Baltimore. I'm not trying to discredit what Baltimore did there, because they had a really good regular season too. But when you saw that Kansas City, that's when the alarm bells really started to go off for New England. And also maybe for the rest of the league, that maybe this Kansas City team is genuine. They've gotten better. Mentally, they've gotten tougher. Now, come playoff time, they were the number 2 seed, and the number 1 seed was Baltimore. But because of the playoff system in play, they get a first round bye, just like they got last year too. Down 24 points in the second round, and really their playoff opener. Down 24 points to a very good Houston team, by the way. This is one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in sports, in any sport. Down 24-0 in the midway through the second quarter, and yet they somehow got the lead. They ended up going into the lead at halftime. Let's not forget that. They ended up scoring they went on like a 51-7 run. A 51-7 run. That is unheard of. The first time ever a team has been down by 20 points and end up winning by 20 points. It was unbelievable. It was, I can't even describe it. And then this, almost a mirror image, not quite a mirror image, almost a mirror image up against the Titans, who walked into Baltimore, who had a great season, and completely dominated them. Tennessee was up by double digits. Once again, they came roaring back and ended up winning that game convincingly. Now we get to the Super Bowl. And the Super Bowl, you see San Francisco, who had a vaunted defense. Teams were experts, analysis. They were all preparing themselves to put what we have in San Francisco up there with the Baltimore Ravens, up there with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the 85 Bears, the Seattle Seahawks with the Legion move. They were ready to anoint them into that next class of great defensive squads. Now, I was aware of that too, leading into my Super Bowl prediction, because what I said was, usually when you have a great offense versus a great defense, I'll almost always take the great defense in that situation. Now, I said almost always because I ended up going with the Chiefs because Patrick Mahomes was something that I'd never seen before. His ability, he is transcendent to the sport, and that's why I think the comparisons with Jordan really ring true. But let me finish up on this story as to, the road that they went to the Super Bowl and getting the championship. They struggled early, then they ended up getting the lead, and then they lost the lead, and then it really looked like San Francisco had turned the corner. They had figured them out. Maybe they took the foot off the accelerator a little bit. Maybe they realized that they won prematurely, whatever it was. But the Chiefs came roaring back and they ended up scoring 21 points in the last 6 minutes. All three, or not all three, but two of those drives were really orchestrated by Mahomes. Of course, the last one that sealed it was their running back, who Damian Williams, I think it is. He ended up getting a 40-yard run to really ice it. But the game was essentially done at that stage. I mean, it wasn't done, but it was Mahomes that put them back in the lead and put them well and truly in the driver's seat with, a minute and a half to go, whatever it was. So that's where we're at. In 2 years, we could have seen him be MVP of the league with one of the greatest seasons of all time at quarterback, with 2 Super Bowl titles in his first 2 years. We could have easily seen that. Instead, he's only got one, which is still incredible. You think of some of the all-time great quarterbacks in the history of the game, whether it's Drew Brees or whether it's Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers. They all have one. They only have one. He's already in that group. And you can make an argument that he's probably unlucky that he only has one. So that's insane in of itself. Now, it's obviously, as I said, it's obviously impossible to really talk about this because it's, the comparisons to Jordan, where do you ring true? How do you, from a statistical standpoint especially, how do you compare? Do you compare points to touchdowns? It's like, what about turnovers? Turnovers in basketball have nowhere near the impact of a turnover in football. But in terms of all-time greatness, we may be on the... Here's where I think it rings true, okay? I truly believe that if you look at the way that Jordan was revered and how he transcended the sport, and people that don't know anything about the sport of basketball, they will watch a game. I've heard stories from people, even back home, people would tell me, older gentlemen or whatever, they'd say, I don't know anything about basketball, but I remember watching him and I could instantly say, that guy's good. And they were referring to Jordan. Patrick Mahomes has that same value to him, where people will instantly look at him and they instantly recognize that guy has something special about him. And Jordan was the first guy to really, and I've heard Kenny Smith say this, and I think he's right when he says Jordan was really the first guy to be an absolute thoroughbred in terms of his athleticism, but also have impeccable fundamentals. Patrick Mahomes isn't quite in terms of like the thoroughbred out of that position in quarterback, because you've got Lamar Jackson, excuse me. You've had Michael Vick, you've had Vince Young, you've had better athletes, pure athletes than Mahomes. Now Mahomes is not, Peyton Manning or Tom Brady in terms of athleticism. He's still a great athlete, but he's not the top tier, whereas Jordan was clearly top tier athleticism. But where Mahomes is transcendent is his ability to not just throw on the run, but he's constantly looking downfield so he can escape the pocket. So when the pressure comes, you see a lot of those athletic guys, and Russell Wilson may be the only guy up there in this class as well that can do this. Once they escape the pocket, they're not looking to just run. So when the pressure is coming from the defensive players and they're getting towards the quarterback, a lot of those guys, they would escape the pocket and they'll be like, okay, I've got to run now. Whereas Mahomes will escape the pocket, and he not only has the ability to run if the opportunity is there to do so, but he's also looking downfield. And that almost creates a dynamic where it might be better to not even put pressure on him, because he's just going to escape it 9 times out of 10, and then you have less defenders on your as resources to try to get a stop. The other thing that really stands out to me, and we really haven't seen a player do this, is his unconventional throwing styles, his throwing mechanics. Now, if you line him up and he's squares up in the pocket, he can obviously throw it. Great follow through. His shoulders are square, arm is straight, everything. We see all that. But when he's on the move, he doesn't need to square up. And what you'll see a lot of times is when a guy will escape the pocket and they do end up throwing the ball, especially downfield, they need to gather themselves. They need to square up, get their balance, and then get their shoulder behind it. Mahomes doesn't have to do that. Mahomes will do it sidearm. We've seen him throw it left-handed. We've seen him throw it no look. We've seen him do all kinds of things with the ball that we haven't seen before out of that position. He is truly transcendent in that way. And I think the comparison there is accurate because it's bringing people in that are watching it, and that those are real things. It's not just, oh, this guy looks different, so therefore he is better. Or it looks like he's playing at a different level, therefore he's better. These are things that you can break down that he does that no one else really does. As I said, Russell Wilson also kind of does this too, but he's not on the same level as Mahomes. He's right up there. Don't get me wrong, he's right up there. But he's not quite on the same level. Probably the same way you can say, Clyde Drexler was right up there with Jordan. Don't kill me for saying that, because I'm not trying to say that Russell Wilson is on the same level as Clyde Drexler, although they both won championships. I think Russell Wilson is... but then again, Drexler was pretty good in his heyday too. He was the second best player in 92. So, I mean, maybe that comparison isn't so far off. But the point that I'm trying to make, though, is when you saw Jordan, it isn't just flash. There was a lot of substance there too. It wasn't just... And that's what you got with Mahomes as well. And in some ways... Jordan going up and dunking on two guys, or going up and hanging up in the air and then coming down reverse layups on the other side of the court, or the fadeaways over, two or three defenders, all that wasn't just for show. It was actually good basketball behind it. There was fundamentals behind it. And the same goes with Mahomes as well, and it leads to victories. It's not just a flashy style that people look at it and say, oh, that's exciting, but it doesn't lead them anywhere in terms of championships. Clearly, what Jordan was able to do led to titles, and it changed the game forever. Because now we saw dominance. We saw players dominate the basketball court from around the perimeter, and also mid-range, and from the guard position, which we really never saw that before. We really, this was the age of the big men, where it was, even guys like Magic, even though he was bringing the ball up the court, he was a 6'9" player. Larry Bird, 6'9" as well. Kareem, you had Wilt, you had Bill Russell, you had all these great players come before that were really centers or big men. Jordan was the first guy that really dominated on both ends of the court, mind you, from that guard position. And Mahomes has changed the game a little bit as well, because he's now dominating the game with a hybrid that we haven't seen before. Now, there is a chance that Lamar Jackson catches up to him if he can master what Mahomes is able to do in terms of his throwing, especially if he keeps his eyes downfield as he's running. I think that's the biggest difference between the two of them, is Jackson doesn't do that. Jackson will escape the pocket, and once he's escaped the pocket, he's looking to run off 10, 15 yards. Mahomes escapes the pocket, and he can still run for 10, 15 yards, or potentially even longer, but he's looking downfield to get a 60 or 70 yard completion, and that's a very scary proposition if you look at their wide receivers. So I think the comparison is fair, to be honest with you. In terms of accolades, of course not. In terms of breaking it down, and will we ever get, if Mahomes ends up with 6 Super Bowls and 5 league MVPs and all that, will we ever be able to really say if one is better than the other? Absolutely not. We will never be able to say. It'll come down to your personal preferences. But in terms of what the impact is and the potential for Mahomes to be a transcendent athlete, the same way that Jordan was a transcendent athlete, I think he's right there. He has the potential to do that because he's galvanizing. And people, as I said, who knew nothing about Jordan could instantly recognize that he was on a different level to everybody else. And you see the same effect with Patrick Mahomes. So that's pretty much the breakdown of it. I've spoken for 23, 24 minutes, whatever it is, of this. And that's where I stand with it. I felt like this was good enough to do an episode on, and clearly I was right because I nearly talked for 30 minutes regarding the topic. If you have not watched Mahomes play, or if you're a little bit butthurt that he's achieving such greatness and such accolades at such a young age, learn to deal with it, because you don't see players this good this young, especially in the NFL. Now, for anyone that says that he didn't deserve the Super Bowl MVP last in this previous game against the 49ers, that it should have gone with Williams, or it should have even gone with a defensive player, I think you're idiots. I really do, because I think there's, you win or lose with your quarterback 9 times out of 10. And it was Mahomes that led the charge down the end. Now, the defense did very well in terms of holding San Francisco and making it, because Mahomes was struggling in that game. Make no question about it. He threw 2 picks, which was rare for him. They were the first 2 interceptions that he had thrown in his playoff career. Like, that's crazy, right? Despite being in those situations when he was down, once again, it goes back to the point I was making. You're very susceptible if you're an offensive player. You can pretty much do nearly everything right and still find yourself in bad situations, whether it's special teams or whatever, and that's costing you. So he did play subpar, especially to his standards, but he came through clutch in the end, which is another characteristic that you can really talk about Jordan, because Michael Jordan's greatest game by far to me was his final game as a Bull. And I'm definitely not trying to bring Jordan down here, but I'm just trying to say, if we're going to say Mahomes was bad, but he finished strong, Jordan's final game as a Bull, he's 15 or 35 in that game in shooting the ball. Now, we always remember the last minute because it was fantastic. It was maybe the greatest minute of sports, especially team sports, that I've ever seen. He played perfect, and it was a perfect way to sum up his career with the Bulls, and really his career, because I don't think a whole lot of people talk about Washington. Although to me, Washington was actually a bright spot for him, because it showed just how good he was even at the age of 40, especially before he got injured. But the point I'm making is, if you're going to try and disparage Mahomes for playing subpar in the first 3.5 quarters, but then turn around and say and be a big advocate for Jordan, well, Jordan was also struggling in his final game as well. So, let's be consistent with it. Anyway, that's it for today's show. Hope you enjoy it. Something a little bit different, and now we'll be able to move on and go back purely to basketball topics, but something I wanted to get out of the way. It's kind of a bonus episode this week. Hope you enjoy it. Subscribe, share it with your friends if you enjoyed it. The show does not do any advertising, and it doesn't promote or anything like that on social media or YouTube or any other form of advertising online. So the way that it continues to grow, and I've noticed the numbers growing quite a lot. Maybe that helps because I'm actually doing episodes now, but I've noticed the numbers going. Continue to share it. Show people it, even if they disagree with it. They may be a big Jordan fan. They may not even think Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league right now, which is a testament to how deep the quarterback class is getting at that position. So share it with them. If they disagree with it, fine. They're more than welcome to voice their opinions. They can shoot me an email, or they can leave comments or send me messages, whatever it is, and I'll be happy to answer them. Regardless, have a good day, guys. There still will be another episode coming out on Friday. That's an exciting one. It might be TJ again. Hopefully it will be TJ again. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and you have a good rest of your day.